highlight of your life is daddyhood.
For those of you who cannot wait and love daddyhood, please head over to our Patreon. We have exclusive access to episodes, we have early access to episodes, and we have behind the scenes footage. Head on over there, sign up, be part of the exclusive daddyhood group, and join us over there. Welcome back to Daddyhood. We are on my path to parenthood. I'm so excited for today's episode. We are joined by Dr. Brian Levine from CCRM Fertility. We're going to get into all things fertility. I can't wait to nerd out with you. Are you ready to go?
I'm a geek, so this is going to be fun.
All right. So before we start, Dr. Brian Levine is the founding partner and practice director of CCRM New York, one of the leading fertility clinics in New York City in the United States. He went to Cornell University for college. He has a master's degrees in genetics from New York University, earned his medical degree from NYU School of Medicine, completed his residency at Columbia University, and ultimately completed his fellowship at the renowned Weill Cornell, did I say that right? Weill? Yep. Weill Cornell Medicine Center for Reproductive Medicine and Infertility. Did you go to school?
Yeah, I'm still paying it off.
Dr. Levine is board certified in both reproductive endocrinology and infertility. So many big words in fertility.
Lots of.
As well as OBGYN, because that's way easier than saying what those words are. He continues to be recognized year after year as a New York super doctor, Castle and Connolly top doctor, and is featured annually at the top of the coveted New York Magazine top doctors list. When he is not treating complex cases in infertility, helping patients preserve their fertility through egg, sperm freezing, working with LGBTQ plus patients, or coordinating care for patients who seek to start to grow their families through gestational surrogacy, he can be found running in Central Park or spending time with his wife, Alexis, and his two daughters, Isabella and Addison. Incredible.
Thanks.
How far do you run?
My favorite distance is 6 miles.
6 miles?
6 miles. That's a loop of the park.
Talk me through why 6 miles. I love this.
So I'm a geek and I like structure, right? Like I wake up every day at the same time.
Yeah.
I love routines. And so to me, a great run is one loop around the park. So Central Park has this big path that goes all the way around and it's 6 miles. It's also 10K, so it also feels like it's like something
you're
respectable.
Accomplishing something.
The other thing is if I ever get hurt, I could just say to someone, I was running 6 miles. And I'm like, that was a real distance.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, I ran 2 miles and I twisted my ankle.
Yeah.
So it's for bragging rights in the event I get hurt.
See, long distance has never been my thing. So people who run long distance, I always like to ask why.
So the other thing is when I run, I do math in my head. And this is like my favorite thing. Like it's
2 things that I hate, running and math. You accomplish to do every day. I love this.
So when I run, like this is how I like start my day. So I always go running or go to the gym, but I like to do like math in my head or think about the day and just like it clears your mind. No music at all.
Yeah. Oh, no music.
No music.
Wow. Good for you. That's really impressive.
Thanks. It's just fun.
I love it. Well, before we get started, I'm working on my dad jokes. So while you're here, Doctor, what sound does a witch's car make?
I don't know.
Broom, broom.
Nailed it.
Gotta laugh.
Got
it's
it.
a successful dad joke.
Can I use it?
You can use it whenever you want.
Because in 2024, it's very hard to have a joke.
Especially that's like somewhat appropriate.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
I'm going to keep it.
That's a good one. I can't wait to get into everything with you. So first to start off, CCRM. Let's talk about CCRM. What is it? And who are you guys?
Awesome. So we're a bunch of doctors who are all geeks. What makes CCRM very special, or the Colorado Center for Reproductive Medicine, that's what CCRM stands for,
Yep.
is that we started in the 80s in Denver. And there was this really smart doctor named Bill Schoolcraft, who's still practicing to this day, who is obsessed with laboratory technology. And his whole concept was IVF is moving really fast, right? People forget IVF is a new thing. It's only been around since 1978. Mm-hmm. And so what people said was, how do we move the needle? And this guy recognized if you move the needle, it's in the lab, where you're actually moving the eggs and the sperm and putting them together.
Yep.
So in the late 80s, he created this clinic called CCRM in Denver, where he just focused on laboratory science. And to be quite frank, that clinic has been killing it now for 30 plus years. What sets CCRM apart from the other clinics in the United States is that we're all focused on laboratory quality. That's where we all start. Like that's our beginning place. So we have clinics in almost every city you would imagine, from Boston to New York to Northern Virginia to Miami to Austin, all the way out to California and everywhere in between.
Yep.
And what we do at all those places, we consistently take care of the toughest cases of infertility. But the way that we're able to win every day is through the lab. And to me, like as a doctor on the CCRM platform now for nearly 10 years, that's what amazes me. So it's lab.
So when you talk about labs, can you sort of paint the picture for people out there who don't know how or what goes on behind the scenes for freezing sperm, eggs, and embryos?
Amazing. So there's 3 ingredients that you need to baking a cake or baking a baby.
Yep.
And so to bake the cake, as I like to say, is like the baby is the outcome, right?
I love that. I'm baking my cakes right now.
You're baking your cakes right now.
Yeah.
So the first ingredient you need is eggs. The second ingredient you need is sperm. And the third ingredient you need is an oven. So think of the lab as the oven. And what the lab can do is offer consistency in how we handle and approach those eggs and sperm, right? So those 2 things are very finite. And like a guy will ejaculate 1 million sperm, actually millions of sperm on any given day. So how do you pick the 15 or the 10 or the 5 or the 30 that are the ones you're going to use to fertilize the eggs, right? The eggs are always the rate limiting step. So what happens typically is someone goes through in vitro fertilization, which means a woman takes shots for 2 weeks.
Yep.
She then has a procedure where we retrieve or aspirate the eggs. The eggs then go into a laboratory, and these really smart people called embryologists who spend their entire life looking under microscopes figure out how to pick the best sperm to put inside the right egg. Now, cool factoid for you. The world's smallest surgery is putting a single sperm inside a single egg. That's called intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or ICSI. And by the way, that's something we do every single day. Sperm is the smallest cell in the human body. Eggs are the largest cell in the human body.
Wow.
And this is what embryologists do every day is they pick the perfect content. Like, how do you pick the sperm? How do you pick the right eggs?
Yep.
How do you put them together? And then they nurture them or culture them in a laboratory.
I'd never put it that way. It is the smallest procedure.
The smallest procedure in all of healthcare.
Yeah.
And like, by the way, this is what got me into the field. Like, this is the geekiest Star Wars thing ever.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
One question that I haven't asked that would seem obvious to ask is how do you select those 15? What criteria is someone in the lab looking at? What did you say their official name was?
Embryologist.
Embryologist.
Right.
What are they looking for? Because I do know from my conversations with legacy sperm and collid, some sperm could have 2 heads and they cannot have a high motility rate. Obviously, I feel like those would be eliminated under the microscope. What are you looking for? What makes a good sperm?
So the first thing is that people forget that, like, in my field, I'm talking to almost every single day to 2 patients at once, right? The sperm and the egg, which is kind of cool, by the way.
Well, 3 too if you have a surrogate, right?
Right, true. Or 4 if there's an egg donor.
Yeah.
Or 5 if there's a sperm donor. Like, it can get really complicated.
Yeah.
But in the most simplistic way, when you're thinking about sperm, what people don't realize is that the majority of sperm are hideous. They're ugly. They look terrible. In fact, the definition of a normal semen analysis, or when you look at someone's sperm, it's 4% being normal, which means 96% can be abnormal, and that's great. Like, you get the normal, like, you get a gold star if 96% are hideous with double head, double tails, fractured tails, or whatever. So what we do is the first thing is we have the guy produce a sample, and then we actually do a filtration step. Now, the filtration step can either be having the sperm swim a race, so we get them to like swim through a filter, or sometimes we let them go through like spinning, like we'll do a centrifuge to filter them down or whatever. Once you get to the point where you've selected what you think are the best sperm, it's then all beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And this is where an experienced embryologist matters. They can look under the microscope and take a look to see what looks like the ideal sperm to inject into that egg. The crazy part of what we do is that sperm are just DNA missiles. Like, think about it that way. Like, they have no function but to just deliver DNA into the egg. All the machinery of reproduction is within the egg itself. So sometimes a beautiful sperm can have hideous DNA inside. So sometimes someone may not have a good cycle because the embryologist picked the wrong sperm.
Right.
Or they pick the most beautiful sperm and there's still kind of junk DNA in there.
So those hideous looking sperm, do we, like, if they make it to, is there cases where they make it to the egg first?
So absolutely.
Like in traditional,
so not everyone does, IVF. even though I think that a lot of people should be doing IVF and we're underserving the population, some people do this old-fashioned thing called sex, and then they actually get pregnant from it, which is like crazy because that's never in the newspapers anymore, in the magazines.
Nobody likes to talk about sex
No one
anymore.
talks about sex anymore. Sex sells, but not the act of it,
right?
And not for reproduction. But what happens is, of course, like the body definitely has a natural selection technique for like filtering out bad sperm.
Got it.
But some people also don't do this ICSI procedure. There are some IVF laboratories where they take a drop of sperm and put a couple thousand sperm on top of an egg and say survival of the fittest. Whoever gets there first.
Yeah.
And I bet you ugly sperm are getting there first.
Yeah. Do we think that ugly sperm is like the bad people in our world?
So
I have a theory that that's the case.
I'm going to geek out with you for a minute because the entire subject of all my research when I was in fellowship was on sperm and how it looks.
Okay.
So the answer is, I think we overcall sperm as ugly. And I think as a function of us trying to help guide patients towards treatment, we're too strict in calling sperm hideous. In fact,
especially if they're just DNA missiles.
Right. So
like you can't judge what a book looks like on the outside if it has good context.
You nailed it. You nailed it right there, right? So I think we're actually being too strict. So we're calling too many people abnormal too often.
Yeah.
Now the problem, why does that matter? Is that we're leading people to go down treatment too quickly. So the answer is, I bet you ugly sperm still make cute kids, but it might be that annoying kid in your class.
For sure.
Right.
Well, all right. So let's talk about this because I got my results back after my first meeting with my doctor, and I was told that I had 4 sperm.
How old were you?
Well, I was 20. No, I was 30. It was Jordan and I did this. I was 30.
And how did that mess with your head?
It was incredibly hard. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. You know, when daddyhood became a concept was before I even went into that meeting. And then as soon as I got those results, I remember calling my team later that week and being like, I can't do this. It's going to be too emotional. It's too hard. It's like I was stressed. And then also then the stress is going to play into everything. I had to make so many different changes. It was really hard news. And he essentially told me, he said, you have 4 sperm, 3 of them aren't moving. They have no motility. And then the one that is alive, did not look great. So, and then meanwhile, my husband has 50 million sperm.
Right.
And I'm just like, okay. And, I have an incredible partner who made all of the lifestyle changes that I had to make to get my sperm numbers up and took the prenatal vitamins with me and kept me on regimen and was super supportive. But it was a journey. And, that was sort of what, full circle. I was like, this is why I need to be doing this, is to talk about have these types of conversations.
So, what you're talking about, so few people discuss, which is really the fact that we don't talk about male fertility enough.
Right.
So 33% of the time, it's the woman. And people know about that. Low egg count, bad egg quality.
You say 33% of the time?
33%.
You would think with how much we talk about it and put the blame, you would think it would be 80.
Right. You think every woman's like, it's me, it's my uterus, it's my ovaries, it's my eggs. 1/3 of the time, it's female.
Wow.
1/3 of the time, it's male. And 1/3 of the time, it's either combined or unexplained. Now, in my world, I believe unexplained is a lazy diagnosis. No one goes to the oncologist and is like, oh, you have a touch of cancer. Let's give you some chemo. And you say, what kind of cancer? And they're like, oh, no, it's just cancer. We're just going to give you chemo. Mm-hmm. Somehow in our field, we're okay saying unexplained. But when you dig deep on male factor infertility, which is what we're talking about right now, those are some of the hardest conversations to have with a patient. And I can tell you it's almost always that the partner says they wish it was them. Male or female partners, same-sex couple or, a traditional couple.
Yeah.
What you end up seeing is that it is a terrible thing to deal with because people feel like something's been ripped away from them. Because as a society, we talk so much about contraception. We talk so much about abstinence as the way that everyone should practice safe sex. No one ever thinks about the fact of maybe we should have a barometer. Maybe you actually should know what your reproductive health looks like before it is too late.
Right.
And there are conditions in men where time matters, where if you would have known this in your 20s, you could have made differences for how you want to perform in your 30s.
It's so true. And women go to OBGYNs and gynecologists every year from a younger age.
Yeah.
Men don't.
Correct.
Why is that?
Because I think we don't talk about preventative medicine enough, right? We talk about performance medicine. We talk about feeling better, right? Your performance is down, you go to the doctor. You feel sick, you go to the doctor. I take care of healthy people every day. breaking bad news to a healthy person is actually really hard to do because they
Yeah.
don't expect that news to come to them. And the answer is, how do we get guys to go to the doctors? We need to do some sort of incentive. Now, with the Ozempic craze and the weight loss craze and the hair loss craze and people having erectile disorder and all this stuff, they're going to doctors. But they're going to doctors for performance reasons because
Right.
they had a problem. We need to get guys going to the doctors when they're 20 and getting a baseline semen analysis.
I love how we have to incentivize guys to even do
I don't know
that.
how to do it.
With women, it's sort of a mandatory thing that they have to do on a
So-
annual basis.
So here's an interesting story about women was that, I joke that OBGYNs are good for what I call the 3 Ps. The pill, the pap smear, and a pat on the back to get out of the office, right? Like that's all they want to do is like their core business, which is the pill and the pap, the pill and the pap. Well, when the recommendations came out that you should do a pap smear every other year, and actually you can space out the timing even more, we worried as a society, meaning OBGYNs, that women wouldn't go for preventative care. Well, like, why didn't someone ring the bell and be like, holy crud.
Men too.
Men need to do this too. Like,
Seems outdated to me.
exactly. Like, why are we not talking about preventative medicine for men?
Right.
And the answer is that guys start going to urologists and their internists when they're 40. And they're like, oh, I need a colonoscopy. I need my cholesterol checked.
Yeah.
But your lifestyle changes in your 20s are when you're going to reproduce.
Yeah.
And we don't think about that.
We don't. So let me ask you, what is different about CCRM when you have to deliver that news? What kind of support can your patients expect, not only from you as a doctor, but from CCRM as a whole?
So I warned you coming into this today that I'm a geek,
Yeah.
right? And I am supported.
I'm fully prepared to geek out.
We're gonna geek out.
I love this.
And what I love about CCRM and the doctors that I work with is that there's 80 geeks wearing white coats that are around the country.
Yeah.
And what we do really well is that we don't say to people, I'm sorry, game over. We say to people, we have something hard to tell you today, but we're going to make an action plan of what comes next. Where is the problem and how are we going to fix it? And any patient that goes to their doctor should be able to leave with a plan.
Yeah.
And people can handle plans.
Yep.
What they can't handle is someone sitting there and saying, so I have no chance, right, doc? And that's really hard. So I think what we do differently as CCRM is we're really good at making action-based plans, and we're really good at figuring out what's working, not working. So then we can go down the treatment plans to hopefully get them achieve their goals.
Incredible. So let's geek out for a minute.
Sure.
What's the role of hormones in reproductive health and our reproductive systems?
For men or women?
Let's dive into both. Let's do women first.
Okay, so women are easy, right? So what people don't realize is that a reproductive endocrinology and infertility specialist, which is a mouthful in what I do, also known as a fertility doctor, is I'm really a hormone doctor. I just happen to use my powers and like training for fertility, like to help people get pregnant. But I'm really a hormone specialist. And what a lot of women don't know is that they've been messing with hormones most of their lives by taking birth control pills.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we don't even talk to people about what the birth control pill can do and what it can't do. And one of the things that, is one of my passions is that OBGYNs need to start taking a look at their patients holistically. And even when they meet them at 18 or 19 or 20, whenever that time is, to say, let's get a baseline of your reproductive health. Let's get a baseline of your fertility perspective. Instead of just like the 3 Ps I told you before, just putting them on the pill and calling it a day. What the birth control pill does is it has no long-term side effects, by the way, and it has good benefits, and I'll tell you in a second. But being on the pill can mask a lot of things. If someone has irregular periods, you don't know. If someone has very heavy bleeding, they may not know it because the pill will make them potentially not bleed. If someone has painful periods, they may not know because the pill might keep them from bleeding. Those 3 things are the key part of my history when I'm trying to figure out what's going on with a patient on day 1. So the pill can mask things. What we don't talk about is that women should not be treated as a one-size-fits-all. And unfortunately, many medications that we treat women with have very few randomized controlled trials to figure out like what is the right dose.
Yeah.
So what happens? The OBGYN has a drug rep that comes to their office. They give them a great lunch. They are like, this pill is wonderful. And every patient goes on to that pill.
Yeah.
And we're doing patients a disservice by that. So the name of the game for women with hormones is thinking about the pill. And again, the takeaway from me, the pill is a good thing. It keeps people from getting pregnant when they don't want to be.
Yep.
It gives them cycle regularity, but realize it can mask something going on. For men, hormones can be sinister, and this is a problem. So in this world of like performance medicine, which we talk about all the time, like all the geeky like podcasts of like don't eat gluten and keep your insulin low and people hacking their biohealth and like everything. Then all of a sudden I get this guy who like looks like he's the healthiest man on earth come in with 0 sperm count.
Yeah.
And I say to him, well, what are you taking? He's like, I take no medicines. I'm so pure. I take nothing. I'm like, but are you taking supplements? He's like, oh yeah, I take a ton. And I'm like, what do you take? And he's like, oh, well, my doctor in Miami is giving me this, testosterone thing that he does. It's a bioidentical, but it's not real testosterone. Don't worry. And I'm like, dude, you're taking contraception.
Yeah.
You're actually taking something right
Is
now.
synthetic testosterone is contraception?
All testosterone is contraception for a man.
Wow.
So when your brain senses testosterone, it actually is not going to make sperm.
Okay. Because
it's
I was on testosterone when I first tested.
There you go.
That's exactly why
So
my results were what they were.
That's why they were. So when you take testosterone, your brain's like, oh, I already did this. Game over. Sperm is a byproduct of making testosterone. The brain doesn't know your sperm count. The brain can only sense your testosterone levels.
Wow.
And so what happens is when you take testosterone and you mess with that feedback loop, the brain says to the testicle, you're doing a great job. We don't have to do anything else. And that's why it drops down. Now, what's the good thing? The good thing is that it's typically reversible. Get off the testosterone, get off the junk, which is what I call all those supplements.
Yep.
Give your body 90 days, which is how long it takes to make sperm, and then you should have a different result. But the road to recovery can take time.
Yeah.
And like any illness, it can take time.
Yeah. And I had to go through that. So
How long did it take you?
it took me 6 months.
There you go.
Yeah. So we retested at 3 months and then retested at 6 months. And then my 6 month results were good enough to freeze.
Awesome.
But it was very challenging to get off of that. And then I was also doing sauna, steam room, hot baths, working out excessively, Pelotoning, all of the no's that I didn't know existed.
So what I always say to people is that if you think there's a chance that you're cooking your balls, doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
It could be spin classes. It could be tight shorts. It could be saunas. It could be...
It was a hobby of mine.
Right.
Cooking balls was a hobby.
If you're cooking your balls,
Yep.
you're decreasing your fertility.
I didn't even know that. I just assumed that was healthy for my
Right.
body to experience sweat, stress, pain. Like that's what we're sort of taught in today's as like health, right? So that's what I just assumed I was doing.
It's inappropriate, right? We should actually be teaching people in high school and college that like your reproductive health is sensitive.
Right.
And that what you do, even though you might look healthy, can actually be disastrous for your ultimate outcome.
So I guess I have part 1A. I have a question that has two different angles I want to take with it. Is one, how come there hasn't been a birth control for men developed if there's been so many great byproducts of like women's birth control? And then two, if testosterone is that, like, why haven't we done some sort of birth control for men in our society today?
So I think we're getting there.
Okay.
But the problem is that guys are really bad at taking medicine. So if you take
That's
a look
true
at
too.
it,
Yeah.
so there's really cool stuff called adherence scores
Yeah.
of how well guys adhere to prescribed medical plans. And typically in January, people are awesome at it. So like New Year's resolution, they're motivated, whatnot. I mean, look at how many people go to the gym in January versus how many people go to the gym in May,
Yeah.
right? Like it's
Yeah.
very different.
Yep.
And so what happens is that men are not typically very good at adhering to plans. But I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
And I think you bring up a great point, which is pharma needs to invest in contraception for men that's not just condoms and vasectomies,
Right.
because that's all that we really do right
Well,
now.
it's easy and lazy and men will do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a one-step procedure.
Totally. So here's the one thing that I love about CCRM. When I visited your website, you immediately laid out the steps, which A+ to whoever made that decision, because I remember just as I was going through this process, it was so overwhelming because I didn't know what went into it. I didn't know how to navigate. And then I go onto CCRM's website and it's step 1, 2, 3. It lays out the entire roadmap of what a fertility journey could look like. And I just remembered thinking, I was like, oh, I could have used this a year ago. Can you walk us through, I'm not going to ask you to walk us through every step, but sort of the intent of like getting to know a patient and onboarding and how you sort of approach each case as like a unique case, but then also how you handle juggling multiple clients, because it's not only the intended parents, you have to deal with the egg donor, the surrogate. There's so many different people that you have to loop in. How do you manage to do that? And what is your intent behind, navigating that on the website?
So structured diagnostics can lead to custom tailored therapeutics. I'll say it again.
Yes.
Structured diagnostics can lead to custom patient-oriented therapeutics. What the hell does that mean?
Let's break that
dig
down.
in.
Yeah.
So basically, if you work up patients in the right way, you make sure that you don't miss a step. And that's what we do really well. So we have this thing called a one-day workup, right? So we're going to not waste your time because your time is valuable and so is ours. We're going to bring you in. We're going to have a woman come in. We're going to check her hormones. We're going to look at her uterus. We're going to do an assessment of her uterine cavity. We're going to look at her general health. We're going to check the genetics. For a guy, we're going to do a semen analysis. We're going to look at the sperm parameters. We're going to check his genetics. By having this structured workup every time, we make sure that we don't miss a step. That allows us to make a bespoke plan for each patient and what their story is.
Yep.
But if you're looking at a moving target and you're like, oh, wait, we need to do one more test, people don't come back for that one more test.
Right.
If you're like, we need to do one more step, people get really annoyed.
Yeah.
So instead, what we'd love to do is to go from hello to go as quickly as possible. And the way you do that is by adding structure to that first visit. And what our website hopefully does, and I think it does well, is that it helps you understand that when you come to CCRM, you're going to start your journey with us, and hopefully you're going to leave your journey with whatever your goal is.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes your goal could just be to freeze eggs.
Yep.
Sometimes it could be to just freeze embryos so you can stop the clock. Sometimes it's to get pregnant. Sometimes it's to get a surrogate pregnant. Like, there's a whole bunch of different goals that people have.
Right.
But we make sure that we address that on day one so that we know kind of like the pace and cadence of what to do for that patient.
Yeah. So if someone comes in with the goal and says, hey, like, I want to have kids as soon as possible, because this is something that I can imagine can be very frustrating and also work against, like, it could be a challenge for CCRM at times, potentially, for clients or people to be like, oh, it's going to take too long. I feel like how you guys have it laid out in structure and how you work with your patients sort of negates that a little bit, because, like, obviously the barriers to entry, it does have a cost associated with it, but also the time of, like, selecting and testing and all of, like, the science that has to go into this. Can you talk a little bit about, like, expectations and the timeline and how quickly you can move and sort of, navigating that with your patients?
So you're a California guy in New York. And
Right.
I will tell you now, every New Yorker is like, I want to be pregnant yesterday.
Yeah.
So, like, this is part and parcel of what I do every day. And part of what I do on day one is set expectations. Because what you're talking about is really important, which is level setting expectations for what we're going to do and where we're going to go. So when I start with a patient on day one, I tell them, we got to figure out the building blocks. There's 5 things we need to know to get someone pregnant. Plumbing for him. That's your semen analysis.
Right.
Plumbing for her, which means how does the uterus look? Are the tubes open? Things like that. General health. How is the health of both of them? Are they healthy people, not healthy people, right? Do you have anemia, like a low blood count? Do you have kidney or liver disease? Like, whatever it is, general health.
Yep.
Genetics, which is like my favorite thing, right?
Yeah.
So are these two compatible? Are they not compatible? Do you have to worry about genetics when you pick a donor? Like, the genetics, and that takes time.
Yep.
And then the 5th one I always tell people is the functional. That's my last part. What has gone into you getting to here today? Have you been trying for 3 months, or you've been thinking about trying for 3 months?
Yeah.
My favorite New York phrase is we're not trying. Like, a couple will be like, oh, we haven't used contraception in a year, so we're not trying, but that makes us infertile, right?
Right.
And you could be like, no. And you're like, well, how often do you have sex? And you're like, all the time. And the husband's like, every Sunday after church. And you're like, well, that's not going to work because you don't ovulate every Sunday, right? So kind of like understanding for some people, even what does trying mean?
Right.
What is their goal? And that's there. And then you do that whole workup together.
Yep.
And then you build a plan.
Yeah. So let's talk about the science that goes into this, because it's one thing that makes CCRM so unique and successful and positioned well to help people is the labs and the science behind it. So what have you seen as far as preventative care and imaging and the studies that you guys have conducted and all of the white coats around the country that have led to new breakthroughs and innovation in fertility?
So I think our game-changing ability is that we're vertically integrated from the genetics all the way down to the IVF lab. What does that mean in plain English? It means that the same place is looking at all the genetics across the country and can say when we're looking at an embryo being normal or abnormal, right, healthy or not healthy, like chromosome stuff that we're talking about there, right? We can't look at eye color, we can't look at height. We're talking about, like, is this going to be Down syndrome or is this going to be a chromosomal normal baby at the end? By having that vertically integrated into the lab, it helps us understand of how do we grow embryos the right way. And what's really cool is that if you look at how we grow embryos the right way and you keep going backwards, which is what we can do, it's how do we get the best eggs into the lab? How do we get the best eggs into the lab is how do we stimulate or monitor the patients or the donors? So how do we look at the ultrasound? How do we measure? How do we check the blood? When do we trigger her for ovulation or retrieval? So like, because we're looking at the top down, those genetics, and then going backwards, I think that's our game changer. When it comes to the other innovations though, hands down, I have to say it's our embryology of how we grow embryos. So we do some really cool stuff, and we can grow embryos on days, and I'm sure you know this now from your experience. So an embryo is when egg and sperm meet together, right? So you have day 1 is when they fertilized. Then day 2, we don't look. Day 3, we look at embryos. Day 4, we don't look. And then days 5, 6, and 7 are called blastocysts. And on those days are when you could have a mature blastocyst that you could biopsy and freeze for future use. What we're really good is at getting people to that blastocyst stage. If you want to run the race, you got to have an embryo. And so what we're really good at is growing those embryos. And our innovation has been, how do we improve our blastocyst conversion rate? How do you go from eggs to babies? And the only way you get from egg to baby is a blastocyst in the middle.
And I've learned this just through now educating myself. You actually test those by pulling out the outermost layer of the blastocyst, right?
Well done.
Yeah.
So we take a biopsy. I call it a haircut.
Yep.
So we take 5 to 8 cells, and then we genetically test those cells. And what we have done...
And there's no damage to the blastocyst when you pull those, right?
As far as we know, there's not. And so we do, very gentle biopsies. We use lasers to do it. It's done under direct visualization. Again, second smallest surgery ever known is doing this. Right? Again, happens in the IVF lab. Pretty cool. But what we do is we take that DNA and then we amplify that DNA so that we can look on a computer ultimately to call it normal or abnormal. And I think for me, because I've now been in the field for 12 plus years, I've gotten to see the genetic testing getting better and better so that we have a lot of confidence. Well, what does that mean in plain English? It means the miscarriage rates are going lower and lower. Because when you're putting back a normal embryo, it really is normal.
What would you say your goal percentage-wise would be from day 1 to the end of that, the creating blastocysts?
So most people are not prepared to hear this because everyone thinks that every egg becomes a baby. But we all know that humans don't reproduce perfectly, right? Like people don't get pregnant every single month. So typically when we retrieve eggs, we anticipate 80%, 80 will be mature. That's a good thing. Sometimes people are like, oh, shucks, like I wanted those other 20%. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't want me to overcook those eggs. And then typically 80% of those will fertilize. Why? Because we don't always pick the perfect sperm. And sometimes that's a problem. And then of those, about half of them look really good on day 3. And of the ones that look good on day 3, about 40 to 60% look good at the end. Big picture, you're gonna go from a lot of eggs to not a lot of embryos at the end. And that's normal. But the other hard part for patients to understand is that embryo genetic quality does not equate to health of the baby, right? So the health of a child is multifactorial. The genes it gets from the maternity, the genes it gets from the paternity, right? There's 2 inputs to it. And however the person carrying it is. Right? So like what the person does in pregnancy can affect it.
Totally. So talk to me a little bit more about the hormones for women and what they can be doing, taking to support that, and also what affects it.
Great. So people forget that a reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist literally is just a hormone doctor. I tend to just do what I do for a living and like use my powers for helping people to get pregnant. And I focus on this one little aspect of someone's life. But we're really trained from womb to tomb to deal with all the hormonal stuff. And the first exposure that people get to hormones as young women is birth control. And so I always use that as my kickoff point when I talk to a patient to help them understand a little bit better, what is birth control? How does it work? How did it keep them from getting pregnant? How does it keep them from getting their periods, right? Because sometimes women don't get their periods with birth control. I tell people about the benefits, right? So there could be a reduction of ovarian cancer risks. So there could be other health benefits. It can help improve acne, which is why a lot of women go onto it. Some women have irregular cycles. But I tell them that there's a major side effect that no one talks about with birth control pills at all, which is that it may be masking the symptoms of infertility. painful periods, irregular periods, painful cycles, irregular cycles, things that are going on, heavy bleeding, all these different things that can go on could be masked when you're taking medication to keep you from actually having your own natural cycle, because now you're in this synthetic cycle.
Wow.
So I don't view it as a negative. I view it as a positive, but I don't think we do a good enough job in society educating people about it.
Yeah.
The other thing is when we talk about hormones, people are scared of them.
Yep.
People are like, oh my gosh, I don't want hormones. It's going to cause cancer. This is the worst thing on earth. And I'm like, well, just to let you know, the fertility drugs all are based on human hormones.
Yep.
And we give you very little of them because the goal is to try to get a bunch of eggs to grow in a healthy, meaningful way. And if fertility drugs caused cancer, fertility treatments wouldn't be on the rise,
right? Because
we have tons of data, right? People forget IVF has been around since Louise Brown in 1978. And so we now have 45 years of data to say that IVF is safe for people. So don't be scared of hormones. Just understand that the pill is the first time you probably ever took them.
Yeah.
And the pill is also reversible. When you stop the pill, the side effects go away.
Incredible. And I can't believe everybody's not talking about that.
Yeah, truthfully, I don't think we give time. Like, I think in the end of the day, we don't give OBGYNs enough time to actually talk to their patients, right? They get 15 minutes with that patient. Yep. They got to get their pap smear done, their breast exam done, and get them onto a new pill.
They want to be in and out.
In and out.
Yeah. Do you think, I know that you can, in genetic testing, test for a lot of different things. And I know earlier you were like, yeah, but we can't do eye color and height. Will we ever get to a point where we can test for eye color and height?
So I hope not.
Oh, interesting. I actually agree with you, but I want to hear your take on it.
So, full transparency. I initially graduated from college thinking I wanted to be a geneticist because I'm obsessed with the concept of genetics because I think it's our story. It's like the storybook of who you are.
Yeah.
And then the environment kind of shapes that story and colors that story. What I worry about is that if we start doing eye color and athletic performance and intelligence and these other things, there's going to be an inappropriate assumption that we can make a perfect baby.
I
agree with you. And the pursuit of a perfect baby is a really hard thing because perfection is in the eye of the beholder. So here's an example. So
it's very Black Mirror.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's very it's controversial because people are like, well, why can't I just pick the embryo with blue eyes? I can already pick the boy or the girl. Why can't I pick the next step? And I'm telling them the answer is because one, eye color could require multiple genes to look at. We might have to do a deeper dive on the DNA. You might have to take a bigger biopsy. But the second is I don't think we're setting people's expectations the right way.
Yeah.
IVF costs too much money right now. The whole process is too expensive. It's financially expensive, it's emotionally expensive, and it's physically expensive, right? You have to go through a lot.
Yep.
If we start looking for these small little things, we're going to add to the cost instead of reducing the cost. Mm-hmm. The second is the environment in the uterus matters a ton, right? Think about fetal alcohol syndrome.
Yep.
If a woman drinks during pregnancy, she will impact that child for its entire life as a result of the environment, not the genetics.
Right.
So I really caution people because what most people don't know is that 3% of all babies worldwide will be born with a birth defect or disability. It doesn't mean it's life-altering.
Right.
Both of my daughters, who are adorable, now I am biased, but both my daughters were born with a heart murmur. By definition, that means they were born with something.
Yeah.
Are we going to get to the place where people are testing embryos to be like, I want murmurless babies?
I have a heart murmur too.
There you go.
Yep.
And I don't think your parents would have discarded you as an embryo to be like, oh, get rid of the Colton with the heart murmur.
Yeah.
But I worry we're going to get there. And the other thing that people don't think about, we have so many freaking embryos in storage right now that people aren't using.
Yeah.
And there's millions of embryos. And so if you were to start doing this for eye color or intelligence or whatever else, people are going to be generating a ton of embryos that they're not going to ever use.
Right.
And I think ethically that's wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I can go in a million different directions here because that was one thing that sort of threw me off the first time I ever went into my doctor's office is nobody prepares you for the contract that you have to sign that day when you go into freezing your sperm and making embryos because of just the intensity of the questions of if you pass, or what happens to your extra embryos? Do you want them donated for studying? Do you want them discarded? Who has the right to them? And I just remember feeling so overwhelmed with that. The reason though I was asking that question is because as a gay man, my hope is we can get to that level, but we can get to that level so that we can try to make it so we can and this is going to be super nerdy, is we can pull DNA out of sperm and put it and strip DNA out of an egg and put the DNA that was in my sperm into that egg to try to have, I would have loved to have biological kids with my husband. Do you think that'll ever be possible?
Yes. So I think we're going to get there.
Okay.
Now, I don't think it's going to happen the way that you described, where you're going to pull the DNA out of the sperm.
Okay.
You might take DNA from
Well, I'm also like in Hollywood and a creative, so
course.
like you went to 7 different schools and are way more qualified for
No,
this.
I just have a lot of student debt.
All right.
But what I think we might be able to do is like take a cheek swab or take some blood cells or take some scraping of your skin and then figure out how to extract DNA from there to ultimately make a synthetic egg.
Oh,
and I think,
so it'd be a synthetic egg.
Right. You'll use a real egg, and you're talking about what's called nuclear transfer, like you'll swap things around. I think we'll get there.
Okay.
And I really think in our lifetime we're going to get there. But the other thing that's crazy about genetics is that genetics don't tell the whole story. And what we do today, and I don't care if you go to CCRM or any of the other amazing clinics in America, right? There's only about 450 clinics in America, which is kind of crazy to think it's that small.
Yep.
Genetic testing doesn't tell you everything.
Right.
And there's a lot of things we can't look for. So for example, you and I were talking before about cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
If your doctor doesn't test the 2 individuals for cystic fibrosis, that disease won't pop up in the screening of an embryo unless you know to look for it. And so that's the other thing. Like, I hope we get to the place where we could do whole genome sequencing to look for diseases that cause problems.
Yeah.
Instead of looking for the nice to haves, which is like the eye color and the height.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's an ethical question.
Yeah, and it's like, where do we stop? Where do we stop? How far is too far?
Correct.
And that I actually remember having this conversation with Jordan about when we were picking our egg donor. It's just like I had to remind myself I didn't want to play God.
Yeah.
And like I had to stop. We had to stop somewhere. We had to draw the line somewhere. Like, what is too much? Like we can, you're only provided a certain amount of information.
So do you know how I tell couples to pick donors?
No.
I have this crazy thing. So I don't care if it's a straight couple, gay couple, single father by choice, single mother by choice, whoever it is. Mm-hmm. I have a very structured way for picking a donor because it is weird. Like,
yes,
it is the weirdest
It's
thing.
hard.
It's hard and it's weird and it feels like a major decision. And you're like, holy sugar, like this is going to be the future 50% of the genetic input of my children. I have 2 little girls at home. I don't curse, so I say sugar instead of the other word.
I was just going to say, I love that you just said holy sugar.
Yeah. So plus it's good for
because sugar's so bad for you too. So it basically replaces the word.
Exactly.
Love
See,
it.
we're on the same wavelength.
Yep, I went right there with you.
So I tell everyone, make a T-bar. So take a piece of paper and make a T. And write on the T your absolute haves and your absolute have-nots. So if you're like, I need a donor who is someone who likes reading or likes travel or needs to be Jewish or needs to be African American, put your necessary, like what's important to you and put that on there. And then on the other side, think about what you wouldn't want to see in your donor. I don't want to use a donor that's been cycled 5 or 6 times. I don't want to use a donor who doesn't make embryos. I don't want to use a donor that doesn't do X, Y, and Z. Whatever it is, make your list. When you can add structure to this very amorphous, awkward phase, you can end up with an awesome outcome where you have buy-in from both people. And you let both partners do it. And what I typically say is let partner A make their list, let partner B make their list, and then figure out how to put them together. Because that's going to give you the roadmap for picking your right donor.
I wish we would have done that. Because we just sort of approached it and just had conversations and had to sit in front of the computer and scroll through. And
It's overwhelming.
It was very overwhelming.
And if your internet sucks and you can't get through each profile, you're like, she's great. Oh, no, she's not.
Yeah.
He's great. Oh, no, he's not.
And then also you just have a weird amount of blind trust in not only that person, but the agency that they vetted and did all of their homework. And there's a lot that goes into this. And that's what was important for me to have, companies like CCRM on here is not only to just tell people who are listening and be like, this place exists, they're incredible, go work with them. But like giving people options to be able to do their research, do their homework on the place that is truly going to help build their family, I believe is just really important.
So you're nailing it. Like that's what we believe, but I'll make it even simpler. Our patient success is our success.
Yeah.
Literally. So we get graded, right? So actually every IVF clinic in America has to report their statistics to the Center for Disease Control or to this thing called SART, which is the Society for Assisted Reproductive Technology. And we have to share our success rates. So literally that's how clinics get ranked. That's how insurance companies decide reimbursement.
Yep.
That's how patients find us. That's how patients decide where to go next when it's not working somewhere else.
Yep.
So we are completely aligned with our patient success. And the last thing I ever want to do as a doctor or a human is say to a patient, you rushed it, and I let you rush it, right? I'd much rather pump the brakes and say, let's go into this eyes wide open. You want another appointment? Let's do another appointment. You want to talk about that donor again? Let's bring her back.
Yep.
Let's do this again.
Yep.
And at CCRM, I think what we do really well is that we let the donors come through and we evaluate them just as stringently as we're working up a patient.
Wow.
And that whole goal is that because for you to get to the point of using a donor is a big step in your life. It's really expensive. And what a lot of people don't know is that the clinic at the end of the day is the gatekeeper. The clinic is the one that says yay or nay to the donor, not the agency.
Right. Right. And I think, one thing that I want to get into with you, just because, we talk in other episodes about IVF, IUI, all these other different methods. I sort of want to talk about mock cycles with you.
Sure.
Because I think knowing what I know about mock cycles and with our surrogate and how we're preparing and putting work in to like really study and figure things out, there's a lot of things that go over my head when I'm reading, because like they leave me and Jordan on the email chain. So we get to see like medications and these pump this up, and we get to see our doctors and nurses' notes in there too. Can you walk us through mock cycles, the purposes of mock cycles, when you recommend it, and sort of how you guide your patients through that?
So, truth be told, I've stopped doing mock cycles.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so it's very clinic specific.
Got it.
And the reason is that a surrogate by definition is a mom, right? Like when you pick a surrogate, she's a mom. She's got kids, she's got responsibilities, and we can learn a lot as we're stimulating her. And so if during the stimulation cycle it doesn't look right,
What's a stimulation cycle?
So when you're growing her lining, for example,
Okay.
to use her ultimately for the embryo transfer,
Got it.
if I don't like the way it looks, I'll pull the plug and I'll just say, let's just cancel the cycle. But the concept behind a mock cycle I do support. And the concept is before you ever run the race, let's do a practice run. Let's do everything we're going to do. Let's put her through the stimulation medications to grow her lining in a very concentric, consistent way. Let's give her the progesterone shots and see what her numbers look like. But the gross majority of the time, they respond.
Okay.
And so I actually think that we put too much onto the surrogate by doing these mock cycles. So I don't do them.
You think it's stressful for them?
I think it's really stressful. It's like telling the patient, here's a trial, don't screw up.
Right.
And knowing what into getting that surrogate is a whole lot. So the concept of the mock cycle also was that sometimes people would do an endometrial biopsy or a sampling of the lining.
Yeah.
And then look under a microscope to say, does her lining look like the way it should look?
Yeah.
Well, we pretty much abandoned that because it's painful, it's costly, and it's timely, and it doesn't change outcomes.
Right.
And again, back to before, it's all about outcomes.
It's such a great perspective that I didn't think much of. And I think that's so cool that you support it, but also just like, you're like, I take it, I approach it in a different way.
So like today, for example, I had a donor that I did a retrieval on. I thank every donor and I thank every surrogate. Now, I'm sure the intended parents are doing it as well.
Yeah.
In this country, most donors, by the way, are anonymous, right? So people don't realize that you actually typically don't know your egg donor, but you know your surrogate really well, which is also kind of a weird dynamic.
Totally.
But I make sure I thank them. Because in the end of the day, even if they're being financially compensated, they're taking a lot of time, a lot of discomfort. It's not painful, but discomfort out of their lives to help another person go forward. So I always make sure I'm thanking them for what they're doing. And I think about their time a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't want them to be stressed or strained, mostly because if they're a killer donor and they're amazing or an awesome surrogate, I don't want to scare them off and have them be a one and done.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of patients I want to treat.
Right. Well, let's pivot a second. I mean, I appreciate it and love geeking out with you, but let's talk about more like the emotional side of things and also just like how it makes you feel and the pride that CCRM and yourself take in creating families and how that goes. Because you just alluded to it. You thank every patient for coming in. So talk to me about the feeling of literally from scratch building and creating a family for somebody who never thought that was possible.
So my Jewish mother from Long Island loves this, right? Like this is what she wants to talk to me about every day. She's like, tell me a success story. Like tell me another one.
Yeah.
Tell me another one.
Because we hear about the trauma and we hear about struggles and we know it's expensive and it's time consuming and all this. But I would do it all again knowing that I have a chance to create a family.
So I have the world's greatest job. And I actually get to play on the greatest team. Like, don't hold it against me because I'm a New Yorker, but like I get to play on the Yankees every day. And
Incredible.
Like, that's pretty cool. And right, like sometimes I feel like Aaron Judge where I'm just like hitting it out of the park and I get to nail it. Now, I tell every patient that you might be talking to me and you might see me, but there's 100+ people behind the scenes that you have no idea that they're the ones who really made it happen.
Right.
I'm just the quarterback throwing the final throw, but someone else was the one who really like ran that ball in.
Yep.
And like someone else did a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So to answer your question, what's the feeling? The feeling is humble. Like every time a patient has a positive pregnancy test, I tell a patient it's a win. Yep. And by the way, in my office, we actually call our patients with every win and every loss, right? Like positive or negative pregnancy test, we, the doctors, call them because the patients put their faith into the doctor. But when you do make that call and you get the other end of the line where like there's just silence and then you can hear like the tears falling and like the hugging and the embracing, you're like, holy sugar, like this is what I want to do the rest of my life every single day. Like I want to do this tomorrow and I want to do it for more and I want to do more. Because at the end of the day, people come into us with a hope and we let them leave with what they dreamed about.
Yeah. It's so powerful and has to be such a good feeling. And I love the fact that you're comparing yourself to Aaron Judge in all sincerity, like because I feel like if more people took pride in how they contributed to our society and to the work that they put in and had that sense of like, I'm helping impact and change people's lives, just like an Aaron Judge is for a fan or entertaining somebody, whether it's on the TV or in the stadium, we would have such a better world.
Yeah,
you know, it sounds so silly and cliche and simple, but like if people approached it the way that you approach fertility and CCRM approaches family building and connection, it would be such a better world.
And I think, if there's any takeaway from this about like what sets CCRM apart, we're geeks who partner with our patients, right? Like we're not going to stop until a patient's ready to stop. We're going to keep hammering away to figure out either through diagnostic or therapeutics, figuring out what's working, what's not working, how do we tweak, how do we modify, what's the right protocol, what's the right approach. But as long as the patient knows that you're in it and that their success is your success, then there's complete alignment. And then when the wins happen, they're just that much sweeter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously this episode has just been a snapshot of what CCRM is. And we'll get into more, hopefully in the future, but where can people find more information about CCRM? What's the best ways? I know following you on Instagram, websites, free consultations, what would you recommend to people to really start their fertility journey?
So I think the easiest way to go is just go to our website. So ccrmivf.com. And what we've done on our website is I think we've built a home for people to learn.
I can vouch for you as someone who, and by the way, I think it's important people know, like I didn't go through CCRM, which I think is like, which is sort of cool for me to talk you through and sort of compare and contrast like my experience with like what I obviously have been following and seeing what you've done on your website and getting to know you too. It's been really cool. But your website does a brilliant job of laying it out.
Well, thank you. And I warn every patient, I'm like, the internet's not your friend when you're battling infertility.
Right.
Because the internet's a really scary place.
Yeah. And
typically you're going to get to some like really deep, weird Reddit forum about like, oh my gosh, I drank coffee and I never should have done this.
Totally.
But what our website does is it actually embraces an evidence-based approach for almost any patient who's coming to us with fertility concerns, either protecting, preserving, or wants to go through infertility treatments, or maybe even LGBTQ+. I think it's a safe place. The second part of what we do really well is that we do telemedicine. And this is like the silver lining of COVID.
Yep.
And so COVID was a terrible time for all of us, right? Like the pandemic sucked.
Yep.
But the cool silver lining of the pandemic is that we learned how to talk to patients in their homes. And talking to patients in their homes breaks down that barrier right away of getting out of your seat and going to see the doctor. Maybe you have a partner that doesn't want to go to the fertility doctor. But if they're on the iPad in your kitchen and they're like sitting in the kitchen, come over here, let's do this. And so what's really cool is we have telemedicine and all of our doctors do it, and we all do it really easily, and people can get appointments really quickly. So we can figure out who you are, then we can figure out from your workup what you need, and we can make a plan super fast.
You could help more people.
Yeah.
And more efficiently.
Totally.
I love it. It's brilliant. Well, before you go, can you please leave us with some advice, some positivity, something you heard, something that stuck with you?
The number one piece of advice I can give anyone in healthcare, it doesn't matter what field it is, but specifically in fertility,
Yep.
stay curious. So when you're going through the process, understand that doctors are service providers.
Yep.
And we work for the patients. So be curious and ask why. Why are we doing this? What are we doing? What is our next step? Why me? Why do I need this? Because if you understand what you're going through, and it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you are in your journey.
Yeah.
But if you know what you're going through, then when it works, it's awesome because now you know what worked.
Totally.
But when it doesn't work, you're not blindsided either. And so I tell any patient, when you're going through the process of fertility, just be curious. And it's my job to educate you whenever you ask.
Just be curious.
Just be curious.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
That's a wrap on Daddyhood.
The ride of your life is daddyhood.